Members, my call to order the 8th meeting of the Bills Committee on Marriage Amendment Bill 2014. We have a quorum now, and it's also 5 minutes past our scheduled time. So may I call the meeting to order? Please invite the administration to join us. I will skip the introduction of officials since we've met them in the course of our deliberation. So the first part of the meeting is discussion with the administration. At the last meeting, Mr. Tommy CHEUNG, and in fact he has written to the Bills Committee on whether it will be against the law for some religious bodies to refuse to celebrate marriage where one of the parties to the marriage is post-operative transsexual. We have written to the administration subsequently asking for a written reply, and we've received a paper from the administration in Chinese only this afternoon. And that's paper CB 2/1803/1314-02. Some members may not have time to read the paper yet, so I'll give the floor to the Deputy Secretary to walk us through the paper. For clarity's sake. And then we will continue with the scrutiny of the bill. Ms. Ho talked about CSAs at the last meeting. If members of any CSAs to move, feel free to let us know. And the Vice Chairman, Mr. Dennis Kwok, has submitted a CSA to the Bills Committee. We could only discuss that after we have completed a clause-by-clause scrutiny of the bill. So we'll first deal with the follow-up questions and members and questions from members, if any, before we proceed. May I clarify a point, Chairman? You said that you would like to meet on both today and tomorrow. And if possible, you'd like the bill to receive its third reading before the 9th of July. Now, if I remember correctly, after tomorrow's meeting, the deadline is due for reporting to the House Committee, right? All right. If we want to have the bill passed on the 9th of July, then we must report to the House Committee on Friday. This Friday, right? We're going to discuss this on Friday. Yes, I'll give an oral report to be followed by a written one. The reason I ask is I've already read the administration's paper. I am inclined to move a CSA, but no, you know, I am not Mr. Dennis Kwok. It's rather painful for me to draft a CSA. Of course, it's difficult for members to do it. What is the deadline for giving notice of CSAs? The 28th of June. So by the 28th of June, I have to prepare the CSAs in both Chinese and English to be considered by our legal advisor. I have never done any CSAs within 10 days. If you want me to submit it by the 28th of June, then even members won't have time to read them, right? You can at least tell us the direction. Yes, I am inclined to move CSAs, but really I can't beat the deadline. which is the 28th of June. And I also hope the members will have the time to discuss the CSAs together. I want to convince members the rationale of my CSAs. So I suggest that we don't have the bill receive its third reading on the 9th of July. At any rate, I have already said that I oppose the bill. So even if my CSA is passed, I will still oppose the bill at its third reading stage. All right. I don't know whether we can really do it on the 9th of July. It is subject to members' views. And as I said, well, we don't want to pass the bill rashly. We have gone through many rounds of discussion on whether we can do it by the 9th of July. It's subject to members' decision. Mr. Hon CHEUNG, well, we have met many times, and I think the case is very simple, is arising from Ms. W's case. If we wait until there is 100% agreement among members, I don't know how long it's going to drag on. So I hope that we can follow our timetable and have the bill passed on the 9th of July. Well, whether we want it or not is just an expression of our wish. And Mr. Tommy CHEUNG has just shared with us his difficulties. And I hope members don't misunderstand us, that we agree to this timetable. I don't know whether Mr. Hon CHEUNG was here. You, Chairman, you told us that you didn't want the bill to be passed rashly. You don't want the bill to receive its third reading, even if the issues are resolved. And please don't talk about the timetable. We don't really have any timetable for scrutinizing bills. Well, I think Mr. Yu was only telling us his views, and so is Mr. Tommy CHEUNG. So I think we can only make a decision tomorrow. And I think we all have a say. Ms. Emily Lau. Chairman, I was absent in a few meetings. I heard that the administration or many members wanted to vote down the bill at the second reading stage. Is it true or not? Well, I've not heard such rumors. Your Highness, I don't know. Please ask whether it is the administration's intention. What intention? Just to veto the bill at the second reading stage. Is that true? Allow the administration to answer, please, Chairman. Yes. Starting from the day we presented the bill to Council, we would like to our level best to have it passed by the Council. Thank you. So you have no intention to ask us to veto the bill? So I think that is clarified. Let's move into our discussion proper. DS, please walk us through the paper. Thank you. Based on the discussion at the last meeting and Mr. Tommy CHEUNG's written question, we have prepared a written reply. We understand that the concern from members is if a religious body refuses to celebrate a marriage where one of the parties is post-operative transsexual, will it be against our anti-discrimination legislation? Before I go into the paper, I'd like to reiterate that the purpose of the bill is to carry out CFA's ruling in the case of a transsexual that has gone through full SRS to allow him to be properly married. There is nothing in the marriage ordinance to mandate a marriage celebrant, whether it be a religious body or otherwise, to celebrate a marriage for any applicants. So this is a very important point. The issue discussed here doesn't arise from the CFA's ruling.
We've consulted the legal opinion and the policy bureaus. Now I will just briefly speak on a few points. Right now there is no legislation in Hong Kong which legislates on treatment for post-operative transsexuals. Now, if religious groups refuse to celebrate a marriage ceremony for a post-operative transsexual, then it depends on the ordinance and on the facts of the case. There can be no general conclusion. There is no, in principle, reason to say that a certain treatment is illegal. Now, it depends on whether that transsexual is a disabled person, whether that body or celebrant, when it refuses to celebrate the matrimony, what were the circumstances, and whether the SDO applies, whether there are unreasonable difficulties. So we feel that one has to look at the facts of the case and whether it's the Equal Opportunities Commission or whether it's the court. They have to look at the provisions of the Disability Ordinance, the Bill of Rights, and Basic Law, and so on. Now, the existing provisions are mainly concern when the cases where persons of different sexes were unequally treated. Now, if for religious persons a celebrant refuses to celebrate a ceremony for a transsexual, then our opinion is that it wouldn't constitute an infringement of Section 28 of the SDO. Now, of course, discrimination is a very important and controversial issue, but this issue is not an issue arising out of the CFA decision or of this bill. So we think it has to be looked at in another committee. For instance, we have to let this be considered by the work group concerned. I have on my list a number of members waiting to speak. 5 minutes each, please. Chen Chi-chun. First, I'd like to thank the administration for the response to Mr. Cheung's question. I agree it shouldn't constitute an infringement of the SDO because there are now only two genders, male and female, and so it does concern trans-male or trans-female. I think one need not be concerned about the SDO. On the other, I also feel that the government's response indicates that Mr. Cheung's question can get a hopeful answer because it says that it depends on the case. Now, of course, one cannot write certain anti-discrimination provisions into the bill. Now, if Mr. Cheung proposes some amendments, I think that he will propose an exemption into the bill. I think it may not be feasible and it may not be totally desirable. And the government says that this is just a translation of the CFA decision. Now, the decision talks about cases similar to Miss W, that is, a transsexual who has completed a SRS. Now, so for instance, a transsexual from female into male, that may not be similar to Miss W's case. Now, the CFA doesn't talk in detail about that. Now, the definition for male into female is different from female into male, and for female into male, the success rate may be only 50%, whereas for male into female, that may be 80 to 90%. And the vagina, construction of the vagina and of the penis are different. So if legislate, we may be challenged in the future. Now, how do you construe the success, or whether it's 100%? Now, on whether the bill fully implements the CFA decision, now, in the judgment of the CSA, it makes clear in many places, firstly, that the standard, or concerning the standard, under what circumstances would a transsexual enjoy the right of marriage? Now, in para 125, the CFA says that the original sexual organ has to be removed, and there has to be a certain construction of his new sexual organ. In that case, he or she will enjoy the right of marriage. So the principles are made very clear in the judgment. Now, as for the whether the judgment applies to transsexual from female into male, now in another part of the judgment, the judge made clear that even though the judgment applies from male into female, actually the principle is the same for female into male, or vice versa. And in the drafting of the bill, we also took into consideration the medical experts' views. We considered that given the principles of the CFA judgment, that is, original sexual organs have to be removed and the new sexual organ has to be constructed, there are now different levels of technique to the construction. For instance, the penis can be more simply reconstructed, or more to a more complicated extent. That is what the judgment referred to, a certain form of penis. UC Wing. Now, concerning ID, that's already very clear for Miss W. The ID will already show her as female. So when there is going to be registration for marriage, the ID will not have a different marking just because she has undergone a surgery. Is there a different marking? Now, our proposed amendment says that the ID will be a prima facie document. So if there's no information to the contrary, we will presume the sex will accept the sex change. Now, for the at the registration authority, now we can check our records. Now, if the records show that the person has undergone SRS, or when he did declare another sex when he applied for ID, we may have reason to suspect that that may not be his sex or her sex. Now, when somebody wants to get married and he will rely on the ID. So does the ID show that he or she has undergone surgery? No. So the church will not dispute what's on the ID. No. So there is no discrimination. The church doesn't know that that person has undergone SRS. Now, the church mostly serves its own members, so it may have records of its own members, so it is possible that the church might know about the sex record of the member. But the ID shows very clearly whether that person is male or female, so there's no reason for the church to turn down the request to celebrate the ceremony. Under our system, there is no need to inform someone that he or she is a transsexual. So I think the possibility of discrimination is very low, so I think there's no need to introduce change by way of subsidiary legislation. Now, we did consider that it may be a long time later, that is, someone has undergone full SRS and changed the ID, sex, or gender, then he or she gets married many years later, and so the bill says that one can just let the person be registered based on the ID gender. Now, if the bill has not been passed and the government has to issue the ID based on the court decision, then will there be a problem later on? Say if the bill is not passed and that person is issued a document, will there be a problem? Yes. Now, as we understand, the CFA decision is suspended to 16th of July this year, and the decision is already part of the Hong Kong law. So the Registrar of Marriages has the obligation to register the marriage for someone in the same situation as Miss W. So there is no future problem that follows from that. Now, in this amendment, we feel it's very important that the celebrants, the public, or whoever understands what the CFA decision means, because there may be misunderstanding which we want to avoid. Mr. Tommy CHEUNG, I'm sorry there wasn't enough quorum next door, so we have to go from one room to the other. Now, I'd like to ask about the government's document. Now, your view is that the sex discrimination ordinance would probably not be infringed, but the disability ordinance, discrimination or DDO might be a problem. Now, Now, of course, we can't have every case go to the CFA. Now, it's not just my view. At the public hearing, the churches, the pastors, they feel that this is something they don't want to see. Now, can the government can be more clear in this? Now, if a disabled person he didn't undergo a transaction, an SRS, he wants to get married at church, no, the church would not refuse him. But for someone who has undergone SRS, the person that now the church might find out from his baptism certificate or his birth certificate that the person was born a female and then has now become a male. So this is a clear situation, but you wouldn't answer me. You say it has to depend on the individual case. So I think this is very unreasonable. And
you said that there is none now. I'm talking about the marriage ordinance. I don't know whether once the bill is passed, you will say that because of the enactment of the marriage amendment ordinance, other legislation has to be amended as a consequence. Then what will happen? Now, it was not in this ordinance in the past. Now you say that somebody who has gone through an SRS can be married under the MO. We are not just looking at this very narrow scope of amendment in the MO. Where's Paul? Paul's here. And last time, so he's here. He said that your bill doesn't really follow the CFA ruling. You have added to it. So, given such a short period of time, I am just asking you a very simple question, and yet you haven't been able to answer me. So what will happen in the future? Chairman, I don't really know what to do. The administration, perhaps you ask the DS to answer again. For a DDO, now if you have a disability and I reject and I refuse to, if I refuse to celebrate your marriage, then you can sue the church because a religious body. If a religious body refuses to to celebrate a marriage for someone who is disabled, then I don't think the church would do something like that. But you may say that in future, a person who opposed operative transaction, well, you can say that that person is disabled, and yet the church cannot violate its conviction and celebrate a marriage for him. So some people say that perhaps post-operative transsexual is someone who is disabled, but the doctors, the medical doctors did not say so. They told us that they were very happy after the SRS. Do we always have to fight to the CFA? A church may not have the money to go all the way to the CFA. All right, DS. Mr. Tommy CHEUNG may not be able to accept your explanation. Ms. Sarili, I thank Mr. Tommy CHEUNG for raising this issue. Now, without extensive consultation and thorough consideration, if we legislate, then there can be a number of issues arising from this amendment. I have read the written submissions, and the right to apply for small houses is a problem. Perhaps will post-operative male, who was originally a female, be eligible for a small house? We don't know. And will a religious body be allowed to refuse to celebrate a marriage for a post-operative transsexual? We know that the fight for equal opportunities is a movement. Now, your answer is when you seek a certain church to celebrate your marriage, you don't have to tell the church that you have gone through SLS, but you can't rule the possibility that someone who wants to fight for equal opportunities would deliberately let the pastor know that he is a post-operative transsexual, and if the minister refuses to celebrate the marriage and commits an offense, then it's a problem. You say that this case may fall under the the scope of DDO, depending on number of circumstances. Then what Mr. Tommy CHEUNG said is valid. As we all know, equal opportunities for people with different sexual orientation is a movement. The day will certainly come when a post-operative transsexual will ask a Christian minister to celebrate his marriage. So there could be one of the consequences very real. So have you ever thought about this, administration? Yes, this is indeed an important issue. We're aware of this issue. We know that it might involve discrimination. We have considered whether provisions will be needed to and we've considered possible exemption for different religious bodies. We know that this is a very important issue where views are very divided. Therefore, this is a very focused bill. We should not say too soon whether we should do this or not. Rather, we should allow stakeholders the opportunity to read the provisions very carefully. Going back to the provisions, the court has certainly said that a post-operative transsexual has the right to be married, but there is no mention of whether his particular wish must be entertained as regards where he wants the marriage to be celebrated. So we really have to consider the other provisions. First, whether this post-operative transsexual is protected by the DDO. According to the HA, which is the expert on this, if a person has gone through proper diagnosis and treatment for some time, treatment can include drugs, medication, and operation. He may no longer need further treatment, so he may not be a disabled person. Section 2 of the DDO, as I've set out in page 2 of my paper, there is very clear criteria for the definition of disability. As we all know, not all who is sick is a disabled person. So I cannot say for sure whether the person concerned is a disabled person or not. Ms. Sarili, I can appreciate the difficulty of the administration. The administration is required by the court to do something, but without thorough consideration and consultation, there can be a lot of implications, and the which I have been thinking about all along. Mr. Paul Tse, The DS referred to the problem of definition. If we look at paragraph 5 of the paper, paragraph 2, a disability can mean a disability that no longer exists. So a post-operative transsexual can claim that he is still disabled. Let me declare interest. I am a member of the UOC, and when some of these post-operative transsexuals apply for government jobs, they claim to be disabled, and therefore they have to go through special assessments by civil servants of a certain rank and grade in considering their applications. Now, for a post-operative transsexual, he felt that he was being discriminated on the basis of his disability because he was not subject to such treatment. So I think the implications can be wider than you think. And if we do not sort out these issues first, now if you ask for legal advice, you can ask Paul Tse, you can ask Ronnie Tong and Dennis Kwok. We will all say that let's see how the court rules based on the facts of the case. But as legislators, we should try our very best to remove ambiguities. We should not inadvertently let religious organizations to be caught. Since there are issues not yet resolved, I'm afraid the current bill is not very acceptable. And I'm grateful to Mr. Tommy CHEUNG's question. I asked the DS to go back and study this issue. Now, I don't know whether this point has been covered. Under 48, we have this definition. If a certain person has received a full sex reassignment surgery and blah, 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 and are construed accordingly. I'd like to know whether both limbs have to be satisfied before we can so construe the ordinance. Because this will widen the scope of the marriage ordinance and may have unnecessarily expand the ruling of the CFA. So, DS, can you tell us what is your conclusion after your study? DS. Mr. Zhe referred to clause 48(1). Now, this is based on the announcement by the CFA. He has declared those provisions unconstitutional. So we must make clear in the amendment that the two provisions have to be construed according to our draft. So I'd like to ask whether our lawyer has anything to add. Mr. Zhong? According to our internal study, I don't think Part 1 and Part 2 contradicts one another, because Part 1 says that a person who has received a full SRLs can be treated as being of the sex to which he is reassigned after the surgery. And this so-called construed accordingly is based on CFA's ruling. No, I'm not saying that the two are in conflict. I'm just saying that Part 1 is enough. There is no need to add Part 2 to make the definition of a man and a woman more rigid. Because by making it rigid, you make the provision more vulnerable to legal challenge. Because the court may once again declare the relevant provision unconstitutional. So why the risk? Part 2 is unnecessary. Part 1 is enough. Part 1 has already taken care of CFA's concern in its ruling. DS. Allow me to repeat. The court has considered the evidence from parties to the litigants and has clearly stated under what circumstances a person can be regarded as a woman under the two ordinances. That is, when he or she has undergone full SRS. Would there be any impact on Part 1 without Part 2? Can you have just Part 1 alone? Can you please? Without Part 2, we won't be able to attain the criteria or the standard adopted by CFA, because the CFA said that the person has to remove his own reproductive organs, and then there should be reconstruction of or construction of reproductive organs of the opposite sex. Mr. James Teo, I'd like to ask a question in relation to the administration's response to Mr. Tommy CHEUNG's question. Para 8 first.
No,
it says it wouldn't constitute and so on, and it says we feel that that a religious organization or a marriage celebrant, based on if they refuse to celebrate a marriage based on religious reasons in respect of this transsexual person and blah blah blah, it wouldn't constitute an infringement of 28(1) of SDO. Now, say a person is a transsexual. Now, if someone originally is male and he wants to marry a someone who undergone surgery to become a female, now will that constitute discrimination, sexual discrimination? Now we have to look at the provisions. Now, if the background is the same, but if one treats the person differently, then that constitutes discrimination. Now, if it's for religious creed, then that religious organization is unable to celebrate a marriage for a trans male or trans female in the reassigned sex, then it wouldn't constitute discrimination, because it gives the same treatment for any transsexual person. So now, say the Catholic Church would not celebrate a ceremony for someone who is originally a male who is going to marry a someone who has been receive surgery from male into female. Now, so the treatment is not different from another couple, so it doesn't constitute a discrimination. Now, the comparison is between the sexes. Now, Mr. To says it's the same sex. But the sex, but there's a transsexual involved, so I don't think it's discrimination. Now, the priest would not let the ceremony be carried out in the church. Then can you tell us what are the principles involved where it would not constitute discrimination? Because you cannot just tell us that it's all depends on the facts of the case. Please allow me to reiterate. Now, this situation, that is, perhaps out of religious reasons, a religious body cannot celebrate a marriage for a post-operative transsexual, then I think this situation can arise whether the bill is legislated. Now, this is an important issue, and there are many factors involved, and we are saying that we have looked at the provisions of the SDO and other relevant provisions, and we have expounded on that. Now, and it depends on the body conditions of that person, and it depends on the reasons why the celebrant will not celebrate that ceremony, whether it's for religious reasons or for other reasons. And also, whether there will be unreasonable difficulties under Section 4 of the ordinance caused to the priest as a result of the situation. So, Mr. Chen Chi-chun, second round. Now, I do not agree with the government explanation. Para 8 says if the treatment is the same for trans male and trans female, then it wouldn't constitute sexual discrimination. Now, there are only two genders, male and female. The government seems to be saying that there is a third gender, trans male, and a fourth gender, trans female. Now, and the government seems to be saying that if you don't help serve these people, then it constitutes discrimination. I don't agree with this explanation. Now, if I were to propose an amendment, if I were to delete the reference to SRS, now it doesn't mean that a transsexual person can be married. Now, because that marriage is based on the ID gender. Now, if there hasn't been SRS, you wouldn't change the sex for him or her on the ID, right? Based on the current approach and consistent with the CFA decision, the SRS has to be a full one before the sex can be reassigned. Now, people are concerned about the discrimination, but in real life, unless I claim to be a transaction, otherwise a third person wouldn't have any way to demonstrate or to request for the information on the transaction. Now, if I have undergone SRS surgery, can the institution find out that I have undergone that surgery? Now, I don't think there are any provisions saying that a person must disclose his past medical situation. Mr. Chu? Now, in the ID records, registration records, now there are stipulated uses of the information, so this situation shouldn't arise. But we don't rule out the situation where certain employers request the applicant to submit his birth certificate or baptism certificate. Now, if that person is requested to submit his birth certificate, would that constitute discrimination? Is there any personal data privacy protection on that? Now, under the marriage ordinance, there is no. We depend on the gender on the ID. Now, for someone who has altered his ID gender as a result of SRS surgery, how is his privacy protected? Now, this is a wider implication arising out of the W case. Now, the legal rights of that person who has undergone SRS, that may have to be looked at by a working group. Now, even if we don't pass this bill, somebody may get a transsexual in the W person's, in Miss W's case, can also get married after July 16th. And if a religious body refuses to celebrate that ceremony, there can be litigation. Now, so it has, if the LegCo passes this, then would the LegCo, now, do you agree that if LegCo passes this bill, then it causes a trap to these religious bodies? I think the situation can arise irrespective of whether the bill is passed. Mr. Paul Chair, I'd like to follow up on the question just now. That is on the DDO. Now, we are not talking about the right of choice to marry, but we are talking about the DDO article section 3. Now it says that if there are certain factors involved, including disability factors, to a certain act or behavior, the presumption is that the act arose out of the disability factor. Now, so if a religious body declines to celebrate the ceremony, then that body would fall victim to Section 26 of DDO. Now, the Civil Partnership Act gave an exemption because it's concerned about this situation, but you seem to be insisting that no such exemption is needed. What are your reasons? Now, Mr. Paul Chair has highlighted the situation in the UK, but the issue is how do we balance the beliefs of different bodies and persons. Now, every society may treat this matter differently, and to be absolutely fair, there should be ample discussion by the society itself. So I think we should let this matter be looked at under DDO. Now, as for the UK, they did include such a provision, but the background was that at that time UK was trying to push through an Equality Act of 2010. At that time, I believe in UK there was a full consideration of the wishes of society, and it struck a balance. Now, it seems that it was trying to take forward the Equality Act at the time. So there are detailed provisions on what religious bodies can be exempted. So I think the background is quite different. Now, this is a very complex issue, so one should look at this under the ambit of the anti-discrimination legislation.
Of course, I didn't have the opportunity to read the background and details of the Equal Opportunities Act. However, there's the possibility of making this very controversial, causing some religious bodies or churches to be worried. So why don't we include an exemption to allay concerns? Because even the administration is not sure at this stage whether religious organizations might be caught. So why can't you take this step? Yes. Then it depends on the kind of provisions you have in mind. If you're talking about an exemption, it really cannot be put under the marriage ordinance, because other pieces of legislation are involved, and we cannot decide whether it is possible or not. It depends on what the provision is about. You just say that religious bodies that refuse to celebrate such marriages will not be in breach of anti-discrimination legislation. It's very simple. Yes. However, before deciding to include this exemption, we have to have the opportunity to allow stakeholders to discuss fully before we take such an action. First, I'm not sure whether under the marriage ordinance we can exempt certain organizations from the liability of another legislation, and we must allow concerned groups and stakeholders the opportunity to discuss this exemption first. If we make a decision rashly here, it may not be the most appropriate way. Yes, this has given rise to another issue. Mr. Tommy CHEUNG, I've said many times that, well, government officials can say what they like. On the one hand, they talked about whether there should be an exemption, and they ask us not to force them and talk to more stakeholders. In fact, they are forcing us to enact the bill rashly. It's the CFA's ruling. However, the CFA's ruling will not prevent post-operative transsexuals from getting married. So on the one hand, they say that we are just implementing CFA's ruling, even without legislation, without the amendment. Even if the bill is not passed, post-operative transsexuals can also be registered. On the one hand, they say so, and on the other hand, they ask us to pass the bill quickly, because the CFA asked us to pass it by the 16th of July. I think they are rehearsing the same lines over and over again. He asked, when in reply to Paul's questions, she mentioned stakeholders. Well, you can just ask the stakeholders. You have this IWG chaired by Rumsky-Yun. Even if you do not enact the bill, you will not affect CFA's ruling. You will not affect the post-operative transsexuals' right to get married. And you want us to enact the bill. We want you to provide an exemption, and you say you cannot change it. Then you withdraw the bill. You consult all stakeholders first. You set everything out clear first before you come back to ask us to pass the bill. Why are you forcing us here? Now, some people say that I don't seem to be from the pro-establishment camp. I don't know what camp I'm in. I am just being reasonable. How can we so rashly pass the bill? I've said this so many times. How can we pass the bill? Because there are so many things unsettled. Well, you're repeating yourself. Yes, they want us to pass the bill on the 9th of July. Why the rush? They repeat the same arguments. To include an exemption, they have to ask the stakeholders. You go and ask the stakeholders whether an exemption can be granted before we give the bill its third reading. Yes. The ruling on W, well, the order has established the right of post-operative transsexuals to get married after a full SRS, and this has also given rise to issues involving the rights of post-operative transsexuals, and therefore the administration set up an IWG to deal with that. Because we know that it is very controversial, the working group will discuss these issues fully before consulting the public. For this bill alone, it is very straightforward and focused. Given the CFA's ruling, we should translate that ruling into our statute law. Post-operative transsexuals that have gone through full SRS should be allowed to get married under the marriage ordinance. So, in fact, it is the CFA that is forcing us to do things, not the administration. Whether we pass it or not, or agree to it or not, well, it is our own duty. Well, please allow me to say this. The administration has passed the ball to our court, but Chairman, you being such a veteran member, understands that ultimately we will be held responsible. So the administration should have waited for the IWG to complete its discussions first. I'm not criticizing judges, but I've heard that some judges may take a glass of wine and before they get to work. Of course, CFA judges are more serious, but that doesn't mean that what they say is a decree, is a royal decree. Well, we have lawyers here, and why do we have to beat the deadline by the 9th of July, as if we were derelict in our duty if we did not pass the bill by the 9th of July, whether the bill is enacted or not? I feel that we haven't done our full share, nor has the administration, and the administration is forcing this bill on us to receive its third reading. My view is the bill should be withdrawn and the government should reconsider the whole thing. So the bill can be vetoed when it is put to the council, and I think it is meaningless to amend the bill, because even if your CSAs is passed, Mr. Tommy CHEUNG, you said you would vote down the bill. So, Ms. Sit-Ho, Mr. Tommy CHEUNG, now even for the BSD and also the SDD, should we withdraw from the scrutiny of the bill and not move any CSA? Should we just vote down the two bills in the sitting? Well, we have really discussed that within the Liberal Party. We oppose the bill. Now, if our opposition is not supported by members and they would want the bill to be passed, then would rather our CSAs can be accepted. Whether you agree with me or not, it doesn't matter. This is my position. Ms. Sit-Ho. Well, for the administration is not pleasing any party. Please don't talk about being a focused bill. Well, using Siwan Leung's pet phrases, you might have done one thing here, but you have missed out a million of things. I think you should work on a package of legislation to outlaw discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or discrimination against sexual minority. Because if you do it in a package, then you can contain an exemption as well for religious bodies. Now, according to your paper, you will not breach the STO. The administration's logic is so long as a religious body adopts the same attitude to male and female, it is not a breach of the STO. But what if there is different treatment to a man born, a man that is about born to that sex, or man assigned with that sex reassigned after surgery? Now, services. Well, you can say that this is a religious place, and you are not a follower. Services can be denied of him. So, as Paranine says, this is not going to be a problem if the church refuses to celebrate such a marriage. But what about DDO? I don't understand why the administration refuses to be categoric, because you're really creating a trap. Para 5, you have listed out the criteria from A to G, and also for other things. For definition of disability, you also say depending on the person's physical and psychological status. But this may not be relevant to his SLS. Perhaps for some of the reasons, he has a handicap, or he has not carried out the full SRS, or he might have, but then there are strong side effects leading to distress. What if his disability has nothing to do with his SRS, then it is not related? So why can't you put it clearly here? Under what circumstances will it be caught by the DDO and when not? Why do you have to be so vague as to say that depending on the mental and physical status or conditions of the person concerned? So no wonder people think that you are creating a trap for religious organizations. Now, from our point of view, we would rather want the bill not to be passed. Now, if it is really passed, we want to move CSAs to make sure that the provisions will not be that draconian. It is unlikely that our CSAs can be passed. I know that Tommy CHEUNG is going to move his own CSAs. We will support or otherwise depending on the wording. I think the safest thing to do is come the 16th of July. Even without this bill, you can still make administrative arrangements according to CFA's ruling, or you can apply for an extension of the stay from the court. You can tell it that is the SF, the LegCo's the position. And you can also wait for IWG, chaired by the DOJ's conclusions first. That is the safest. To apply for an extension of the stay from the court is the best. If not, now, if you want the bill to be passed, I hope that you won't have enough votes.
Yes, any response? No, I will be brief. Now, of course, this is a very complex issue. It's not that we intend to use a very narrow amendment bill to deal with the sexual discrimination issue. This is merely to implement the order of the court in the W case. Now, there are very complex issues like the sexual recognition issue. The SJ is chairing this IWG to look at this, and it will consult the public at an appropriate time before it comes to a decision. It's not that we don't care, but we are adopting a two-pronged approach at the same time. Ms. Priscilla Leung, I don't blame the administration. It's the CFA that wants us to legislate, and this creates a problem because this is a very controversial. There has been barely any formal discussion within LegCo. Now, in the judgment, I think it shows there has been no consideration of the issues raised by members just now. Now, I'm very glad that most of the members agree with what I said in the council debate last year. There is no urgent need to legislate. Now, Mr. Chen Chi-chun asked me not to expand on that. And now we see the big differences. Now, the DS mentions the work group. Now, is it the group headed by the SJ on sexual discrimination? Now, I also sat on a committee where certain doctors came and spoke, and this is an issue that involves the SDO, involves the DDO. Now, I also conducted my own study. Now, I have, I can quote these specific cases. Now, people say that Now, the EOC want them to reply, and they took the matter to the EOC, and in UK there's also a case. There are also cases where certain people who are probably transsexuals try to use the DDO to sue certain people, and the court says that they should rely on the SDO rather than the DDO. And I think the ruling was reasonable, and most people didn't think don't think that the matter has to do with DDO. Now, what are we doing? We need to think about that. Most ordinary men on the street, people on the street, don't know how to differentiate. Now, the court has come up with such a ruling, and it may not have been aware of the possible wide implications. Now, even a religious exemption may not be enough. Now, because Hong Kong is a mainly Chinese society, I have been in contact with many people of different religious backgrounds, so many Chinese families have this kind of conservative view. Now, it's not enough just to talk about religious discrimination. Now, the ruling didn't consider these issues. Now, I don't think legislation is enough to resolve the matter. The doctors talk about these issues, and I consulted certain psychologists. They showed me a lot of diagrams, level 1, level 2. 3 lawyers went to listen to these experts. We didn't know what level constitutes discrimination against disabled persons. So it gets very complex, and the legal sector doesn't agree with you that this whether this concerns disabilities. Now, when you legislate, people after you legislate, people dare not explore the issue. So this is my experience. The DS, any response? Please be brief. If not, the next member, UC Wing. Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Leung is right. The court has kicked the ball over. We are forced to accept it. I don't know whether we should pass it. Now, the WK's decision is to be turned into legislation. But if we are going to offer amendments, then it can be very complex because when we talk about rights, the implications are very wide-ranging. Now, I hope the matter can be concluded on 16th of July. Now, if the bill cannot be enacted, Ms. W is still given legal protection. The DS says that there is some difference. Now, for instance, Ms. Dari Lee mentioned the small house rights. Now, will the court decision be enough to offer the protection, or will the statutory law protection be required? So if the bill is passed, would that be better? Can you give us some information? Now, this matter has to be dealt with by the IWG under Mr. Yuen, the DS. Now, this bill mainly, or in fact it only deals with the right of a transsexual who has undergone full operative SRS. Now, as for small house rights and inheritance of estates and so on, now these matters are to be dealt with by the work group headed by the SJ. Now, the secretary of the group came to this committee on the 29th of April. She said that the committee will deal with sexual recognition issue, what evidence is required, what are the procedures required, so what will be implications for other legislation concerning small house rights, etc. Those will be looked at by the group. Now, in the case of Miss W, what difference does it make whether the bill is passed or not? How does it affect her life in future? Now, on Miss W, the court says very clearly that after the order becomes effective, she can get married, whatever the other circumstances. So now, as for where the law is involved, now for the wider implications for transsexuals, that depends on the conclusions of the IWG under Mr. Rumsky-Yuen. Mr. Yuen? Now, if we simply pass it, it merely resolves the government in respect of some of its work. Now, and so I think that we can just wait and see to see whether the bill can be passed. And Mr. Yuen has made his view very clear. The discussion about sexual orientation will not be concluded within a short time. There will be broad discussion in society. Now, of course, every member can propose amendments. Every member has that right. So, so in any case, there has to be second reading and then amendment and then third reading. Mr. Chen Chi-chun, now there is no legislation defining gender or sex in Hong Kong. So on transsexuals, what are the implications? In fact, that has not been dealt with internationally. Now, if Hong Kong has no such legislation, then in respect of small house rights, then people might have to in fact might because there has been no other legislation on transsexuals' rights, then people might look at this legislation, look to this legislation. Now, if the transsexual is to amend the gender on ID, the government already has an established set of procedures. No matter how lax the legislation, the person cannot get married unless there is the gender change on the ID. Now, in 40B of the bill, it talks about the travel documents and the ID. Now, travel documents involve other countries. Now, if the person has undergone transsexual SRS in another country and changes gender there, if the person does not tell you that he is a transsexual, Hong Kong wouldn't know. He can rely on his foreign passport and get married. But if that person is honest and tells people that he has undergone SRS in abroad, or he has undergone no SRS, but he got his gender changed on his travel document, then he cannot get married. He or she cannot get married in Hong Kong because of this bill. Now, to my understanding, the administration has no mechanism to investigate whether this person has undergone SRS surgery. Now, in my understanding, that the government has no such mechanism. So in the future, if the person is found out that he has not been fully become a member of the opposite sex, then the consequences might be very difficult.
Both questions have been answered in the past, so please be brief. Thank you. Mr. Chen's example has exactly pointed out why we need to put CFA's ruling into our statute law, i.e. the marriage ordinance, because an expatriate or foreigner may not know CFA's ruling very well, and he may have a misunderstanding. Although we really required parties to a marriage, when they come to register, to make an application to us, and both have to declare that they fulfilled the what's in the requirement, the marriage ordinance. There is no obstacles to their getting married in Hong Kong, so they would know that after post-operative transsexuals has undergone full SRS, then they can get married. So this ruling or this bill is not just important or significant to people like W. It's also important to everyone, so that they can understand the marriage ordinance clearly. And the amendment here, will this amendment affect other things? No, the first question is, if a person has to confirm, or will the administration take the initiative, will there be any verification mechanism? In our plan, Section 12, under Section 12 of the marriage ordinance, applicants have to make a declaration. The declaration is not a legal document. We want to include in that document the definition for man and woman. And if the parties have queries, we can give them documents at once to let them know that according to CFA's ruling, man and a woman would also include people who have undergone a full SRS. Any other concerns? If not, I suggest we go through the bill clause by clause. Okay. Mr. Paul there. I've been checking Section 12 of the Marriage Ordinance, and that's about the declaration. I think it is about whether there is any objection, whether there is consent. It's not really about the definition of man and woman. Section 12, we do not see any proposal to amend it yet. So how are you going to deal with the content of the declaration? Section 12. The parties that propose to get married will have to say that there are no legal obstacles to their getting married, such as any kinship relationship, so on and so forth. Since it is not a legal document, we have a leaflet for them to follow in making that declaration, and we can add that. And if the parties proposing to get married ask us what is meant by this, we can give them the relevant documents, and we can also include that in our website. But the website, the declaration is about whether there is any obstacles to their getting married. For instance, if they are underage, they need the consent of their parents, and they cannot be blood relatives. And if you add the point about man and woman, then will that be against the law? Well, our legal advice says a lawful hindrance can include that. In 12.1b, Section 12.1b, the parties proposing to marry have to say that they do not have any lawful hindrance as set out in Section 27.1 of the Marriage Ordinance and other known hindrances. Now, if the sex doesn't fulfill our requirement that the person has to be somebody who has carried out a full SRS, then he cannot be legally married. Mr. Ray Chen, has Section 12 ever been presented to us? No? Then can that be done? Now, in case the bill is vetoed, can you change that declaration? We can let members see the proposed amendment to the declaration. And in case the bill is not passed, we have details. We have administrative arrangements to be made. On our website, we have to mention CFA's ruling and also the details of the declaration. Even if the bill is not passed, our intention is to amend the declaration because it's part of the amendment or part of the CFA ruling. Ms. Low, Dr. Priscilla Low. Can the administration give us a full reply afterwards? That is what will happen if the bill is really not passed. Please tell us how you're going to deal with the problem. For instance, the declaration, you may have to amend the important paragraphs of the ruling into Chinese. because it is now in English. And if you cannot give us a reply now, please do so at the next meeting. Can you give us a reply now or tomorrow? Because the next meeting is tomorrow. As Mr. Chiu said, parties intended to marry will have to make a declaration under Section 12, and we have to quote from the relevant provisions. Because of CFA's ruling, we have to add the definition of men and women, the addition to the definition in the light of CFA's ruling. And if you have further points to add, please let us know in the future. Okay. All right, let's look at part 1 of the bill. I have moved I have handed in 2 CSA. All right, it doesn't matter. I'd like to take this opportunity to let colleagues know that I have submitted 2 sets of CSAs to the chairman. One is an exemption. Another set is to use a new definition to perhaps we shouldn't discuss it now. Allow me 1 more minute and then I can finish. I have 2 sets of CSAs, hoping to seek a consensus. If members can choose from 2 of them, then I will just move 1 set of amendments. If members are undecided, I'll invite another member to move it on my behalf. All right, page 1, long title. Anyone from the administration? DS? The long title sets out the objective of the bill, and that is to amend the marriage ordinance to provide that for determining the sex of the parties to a marriage, a person who has received a full sex reassignment surgery is to be treated as being of the sex to which the person is reassigned, and to provide for related matters. So this is to amend the bill according to CFA's ruling. Ms. Ho. Yes, I'd like to ask, why do you have to say full sex reassignment surgery in the long title? Sometimes the administration is very awkward. Even though the long title is not part of the ordinance, the administration tends to use it to narrow down the scope of amendments we can move, because both of my CSAs will inevitably have to amend the long title that is subject to the approval of the President. And I think the administration will only know what I'm talking about after it has received my CSAs. I'd like to know, does it matter if you leave out full sex reassignment surgery in the long title? Yes, because this is a very important principle in the CSA's ruling. Full SRS, as I've quoted from para 125 of the ruling, there must be removal of the original genital organs and some form of the genital organs of the opposite sex have been constructed. Well, this will not prevent Mr. Tommy CHEUNG from moving his CSAs for exemption for religious bodies, and I hope that he can move his CSAs as soon as possible. Mr. Ray Chen, I think they have narrowed down the scope so much that we have to challenge the long title as well before we can move CSAs. The CFA has ruled that somebody who has received a full SRS can get married in the sex to which he is reassigned. It doesn't say that only those who have received full SRS can get married. Rather, he said that it should be for the legislature to decide. By putting the long title in this way, there is nothing the legislature can do, assuming that we think that 70% of the SRS will be sufficient. Does it mean that there is no room for us to move such an amendment? Well, there may be discussion, but amendment may not be possible. Starting from day one of this Bills Committee, this has always been a controversial issue. Why does the administration want this bill? And the administration's answer is it is the CFA's ruling. And members ask, why don't you wait for the full review by the IWG is completed? Well, I'm saying that even if you want a surgery, you don't have to say a full surgery. Why don't you say a person who has received a sex reassignment surgery? Now, but of course, it is a deliberate move. You can tell me that because you don't want the bill to be amended by us in any way. Yes. Yes, I thank the chairman for reminding us that the purpose of the bill is really to put CFA's ruling into our statute law, no more, no less.
And also in para 124, the CFA makes very clear that apart from a person who has undergone full SRS, who are entitled to get married, they point out that they have not decided on whether someone is entitled if there is a lesser degree of sexual change. Now, okay, that has been made very clear. Any other comment? If not, we come to one short title and commencement. Yes? Now, this is mainly to reflect the amendment. Any question, Ms. Ho? Now, on the commencement date, bracket 2, it says that it's to be appointed by the Secretary for Security by a notice published in the Gazette. Today is 16th of June. Can the Secretariat tell us, for instance, now the government has not yet seen my proposed amendments. Now, I hope that they will read my amendments before the next meeting. So this week we will look at my amendments and Mr. Tommy CHEUNG's amendments. Then what's the timetable of going to the council? I've already said that once. Perhaps the Secretariat can say it again. Now, if the administration wants this to go to the council on 6th of July, then this bill committee has to make a report on this coming Friday, 20th of June. We can make a verbal report first. Yes, if there is to be CSA, then it's 28th of June. So there is time. Now, if even after tomorrow's meeting, you can submit amendments. Now, we submit a report to the House Committee on 20th of June. We still have to inform the President when there's going to be the second reading. That's going to be proposed by the administration. As for now, we will come to a decision tomorrow. Mr. Dennis Kwok is going to have a CSA. Yes, he has already submitted a sunset clause. The speaker is not speaking through the mic. Mr. Tommy CHEUNG. Now, last week the chairman said that we hope that there can be third reading on 9th of July because that would be in accordance with the CFA decision, where we respect that decision. Now, I already said that I cannot complete my CSA English and Chinese version before 28th of June. And even if I were able to, there wouldn't be enough time for discussion with my colleagues. And for second reading, now people may not be able to understand what I mean in my CSAs. Now, Mr. Dennis Kwok says he's going to have an amendment. I am going to have an amendment, but I'm not able to do it within such a short time. Now, I don't want this bill to go to third reading on 9th of July. Mr. Tommy CHEUNG is repeating his view. Now, even if members wish to submit CSAs, now we can discuss the CSAs in the committee, and we understand that Mr. Tommy CHEUNG may not be able to complete his CSA in full. Now, as for whether any CSA goes to the council, I think this depends on how members support it in this committee. Chen Chi-chun. Now, you can tell us about your idea of a CSA tomorrow. Maybe it doesn't have to be the full versions. Now, if you have a Chinese version, the legal division may be able to assist. Mr. Dennis Kwok. Now, Chairman, I all along paid attention to the discussion. Ms. Sid Ho just showed me her amendments. I will study those. Mr. Chen Chi-chun and Mr. Tommy CHEUNG also said that they will propose their respective amendments. I've drafted two. I am very concerned now, given the current progress, whether we can fully deal with the CSAs raised by each member. If we are unable to, I don't think we should force it through. Now, of course, that's not what the chairman says, but I think the chances are not optimistic right now. Now, Ms. Priscilla, to be very frank, as of now, I have grave concerns about the amendments. There are issues, even if you have an exemption, the issues are not resolved. Now, I hope that tomorrow you can be prepared and inform me whether it's that simple. Now, you say you will amend the declaration or affirmation. Now, so you are already putting into practice the court's decision, but of course you have to make it understandable to the public in the Chinese version. So I want to understand now, if the bill is not passed, what are the concrete matters that you need to deal with. That's important for my consideration tomorrow. Now, also, there are some questions that I think you may not be able to answer right away when we are studying these issues. Now, many things are actually quite wide in implications. Now, I think people have already expressed their views. and we don't agree with the medical sector that the disabled that these transsexuals are disabled persons. So I think tomorrow we need to consider the question that I asked just now, Ms. Sidho. Now, I have always blamed the government for submitting documents to us at a late date, and we don't have enough time to read the documents before the meeting. I have to apologize also for my late submission of my amendments. So shouldn't we allow the administration 1 or 2 more days before we talk about the amendments? Although I know that these amendments certainly wouldn't pass, but we still have to follow the right procedures. Mr. Ronnie Tong, I'd like to hear the administration's response. Now, of course, the court has given a deadline, but I believe the court respects the LegCo, just as the LegCo respects the court. Now, the court is not saying that you must give us a piece of legislation. I don't think that's the court's attitude. Now, if we cannot pass the bill on 9th of July, and if the bill is voted down at second or third reading, the government says that the judgment will still take effect anyway. But if the bill doesn't pass, will the court be asked by the government to give us some extra time to deal with the issue? Now, I don't know if the court understands the difficulty faced by the LegCo. I don't know whether the government has informed the court. Now, a number of members have asked us to consider whether we support this bill going to the chamber on the 9th of July. Now, Mr. Tong, your question has been raised a number of times in this committee. The administration has said that it will not put the matter back to the court. We have to end the meeting by 6:30. Now, these matters should be discussed tomorrow. We should fully discuss on whether this matter should go through. Now, if we object to it, then it won't go to the council on 9th of July. Now, we have to tell the council whether we support this bill. I'd like to ask how great is the possibility now, whether there's a postponement or voting down. Now, has the government considered how to deal with the issue? Yes. Now, of course, we understand and respect the members' obligation to scrutinize the bill. We explain our stance. We are taking a double approach. The working group is headed by the DS, is by the SDT, by Mr. Yun is looking at this. My question has not been answered. I asked whether you have told the court about the difficulty faced by us. We are mainly assisting the members to scrutinize the bill right now. We haven't taken the matter to the court. Now, I think we should be fair to Mr. Ronnie Tong. In case the bill is passed, I agree there should be a religious exemption. So I think there should be time for Liberal Party to come up with an amendment, and then we discuss all the amendments, and we follow the normal procedure and second reading and so on. That point has already been made. So like Mr. Tommy CHEUNG, I do not support rushing for 9th of July. So we can decide that tomorrow. It's now 6:30. Now the meeting should end here. Now the members who attend the meeting most regularly say that there is no need to hold to the 9th of July date, whereas other members show the opposite stance. Now, I think in any case, this is the Bills Committee, and we can all express our own inclinations, and the decision will be, the views will be heard. We have to consider whether we have the time to conclude this. Should there be a vote? Yes, certainly we will have a vote in order to know whether we can let this bill go to the Council on 9th of July. Now, tomorrow we will continue the clause-by-clause scrutiny, start using the marked-up copy. Well, I don't know what my other commitment, how long that will take. So tomorrow it will be 10:45 a.m. Thank you.